Sarah Martinez gripped the steering wheel of the armored transport vehicle as dust clouds swirled around the convoy. The desert heat made her uniform stick to her back, but she kept her eyes focused on the road ahead. In the passenger seat, Sergeant Collins checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. "How much further to the outpost?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "About 15 clicks, Sergeant," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the rough terrain that made the vehicle bounce and shake. "Should be there in 20 minutes if we don't hit any trouble." Collins nodded and went back to studying the map spread across his lap. Behind them, in the cargo area, 6 other soldiers sat quietly, their gear rattling with each bump in the road. They were heading to Forward Operating Base Falcon, a small outpost near the border that served as an early warning station for enemy activity in the region. Sarah had been driving military vehicles for almost 2 years now. It wasn't the most glamorous job in the Army, but she was good at it. Really good. She knew every truck, jeep, and armored vehicle in the motor pool like the back of her hand. She could change a tire in record time, fix a broken fuel line with basic tools, and navigate through terrain that would challenge drivers with twice her experience. The other soldiers didn't pay much attention to her. To them, she was just the driver, the person who got them from point A to point B safely. They talked around her, through her, sometimes like she wasn't even there. She had gotten used to it, mostly. "Martinez," Collins said without looking up from his map. "When we get to Falcon, you'll be staying for a few days. They need a driver for supply runs between the outpost and the main base." "Copy that, Sergeant," Sarah replied. She had heard about Forward Operating Base Falcon from other drivers. It was a small facility, maybe 60 soldiers stationed there at any given time. They called it a hardship post because of how isolated it was. The nearest town was 50 miles away, and the main base was even further. The soldiers stationed there did 6-month rotations before getting transferred back to larger facilities with better amenities. The landscape around them was mostly empty desert, with occasional rocky outcroppings and dried-up creek beds. Sarah had driven through this area before, but never to Falcon specifically. She relied on her GPS and the convoy leader in the vehicle ahead of her to guide the way. As they crested a small hill, Sarah caught her first glimpse of Forward Operating Base Falcon. It looked like most other small outposts she had seen. High concrete barriers topped with razor wire formed a rough rectangle around a collection of prefabricated buildings and tents. Guard towers stood at each corner, with soldiers visible in the afternoon sun. A large American flag flew from a pole in the center of the compound. "There it is," Collins announced to the passengers behind them. "Home sweet home for the next few days." Sarah slowed the vehicle as they approached the main gate. 2 guards stepped out of a small building, weapons at the ready but not pointed at the convoy. One of them held up his hand, signaling them to stop while the other checked their identification and paperwork. "Sergeant Collins with a resupply convoy from Bravo Company," Collins called out through his open window, handing over their movement orders. The guard studied the papers carefully, then walked around the vehicle to check the cargo area. After a few minutes, he waved them through. The heavy metal gates swung open with a loud clank, and Sarah drove the convoy into the base. The interior of Forward Operating Base Falcon was busier than it had looked from the outside. Soldiers moved between buildings carrying equipment, supplies, and weapons. A group near the motor pool worked on maintaining vehicles, their uniforms stained with oil and grease. The sound of generators hummed constantly in the background, providing power to the essential systems. Sarah parked the transport vehicle in the designated area and turned off the engine. The sudden silence after hours of driving felt almost overwhelming. Collins and the other soldiers climbed out, stretching their legs and gathering their gear. "Martinez," Collins said as Sarah secured the vehicle. "Report to Captain Morrison in the command center. He'll brief you on your duties while you're here." Sarah grabbed her duffel bag and weapon from the driver's compartment. The command center was easy to find. It was the largest building in the compound, with multiple antennas and communication equipment on the roof. She walked across the dusty courtyard, nodding to other soldiers she passed along the way. Inside the command center, the atmosphere was more focused and intense than the casual activity she had seen outside. Several soldiers sat at computer workstations, monitoring radio frequencies and tracking movement in the surrounding area. Maps covered most of the walls, marked with colored pins and symbols that meant nothing to Sarah but clearly held significance for the people working there. Captain Morrison stood near the center of the room, studying a large digital display that showed the local area around the base. He was a tall man with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent most of his career in remote outposts like this one. "Sir, Private Martinez reporting as ordered," Sarah said, snapping to attention. Morrison turned to look at her. His expression was neutral, neither welcoming nor unfriendly. "At ease, Private. I understand you'll be handling our supply runs for the next few days." "Yes, sir. Sergeant Collins briefed me on the way here." "Good." Morrison walked over to a smaller map mounted on a nearby wall. "We run supplies between here and Firebase Charlie 3 times a week. It's about a 40-minute drive each way through relatively safe territory. But we don't take any chances. You'll have an escort vehicle and radio contact with both bases during every trip." Sarah studied the route he indicated on the map. It looked straightforward. A paved road for most of the distance, with only a few miles of dirt track near Firebase Charlie itself. "The area has been quiet lately," Morrison continued, "but we've had reports of increased enemy activity about 30 miles to the north. Intelligence suggests they're moving weapons and personnel through the region, possibly planning something bigger." "Understood. Sir." Morrison handed her a folder containing route maps, radio frequencies, and contact information for both bases. "Your first run is tomorrow morning at 800. Get some rest tonight and familiarize yourself with the route. Any questions?" "No, sir." "Dismissed." Sarah left the command center and made her way to the temporary quarters she had been assigned. It was a small room in a prefabricated building with just enough space for a bunk bed, a small desk, and a locker for her personal belongings. The walls were thin, and she could hear conversations and activity from the neighboring rooms. She unpacked her gear and studied the materials Captain Morrison had given her. The route between the two bases looked simple enough, but she made mental notes about potential problem areas, places where the road curved sharply, areas with poor visibility, and spots where an ambush might be possible. That evening, Sarah joined the other soldiers in the dining facility for dinner. The food was typical military fare, not terrible, but nothing special either. She found a seat at a mostly empty table and ate quietly while listening to conversations around her. Most of the talk centered on news from home, complaints about the heat and isolation, and speculation about when various soldiers would be transferred back to larger bases. A few soldiers discussed the increased enemy activity that Captain Morrison had mentioned, but their tone was casual rather than concerned. After dinner, Sarah walked around the perimeter of the base to get a feel for the layout and security measures. The guard towers were manned around the clock, and regular patrols walked the perimeter fence. Motion sensors and cameras provided additional security coverage. For a small outpost, Forward Operating Base Falcon seemed well defended. As the sun set, the temperature dropped noticeably, and Sarah was grateful for the cooler air. Desert nights could be surprisingly cold after the blazing heat of the day. She returned to her quarters and spent some time cleaning her weapon and preparing for the next day's supply run. Before going to sleep, Sarah thought about the route she would be driving tomorrow. 40 minutes each way through mostly safe territory sounded routine, but she knew that in this environment, routine could change quickly. She had learned early in her military career to stay alert and prepared for anything, even on supposedly simple missions. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn and made her way to the dining facility for breakfast. The base was already active despite the early hour, with soldiers preparing for the day's operations and duties. She ate quickly and headed to the motor pool to inspect her vehicle for the supply run. The transport truck she would be driving was similar to the one she had arrived in, armored, reliable, and capable of carrying a significant load of supplies. She checked the oil, fuel, and tire pressure, then tested the radio equipment and other systems. Everything appeared to be in good working order. Corporal Jackson from the security detail introduced himself as her escort for the trip. He was a friendly soldier about her age, with an easy smile and a casual manner that put Sarah at ease. His vehicle was a lighter armored truck with a mounted machine gun operated by Private Stevens, a quiet soldier who looked like he took his job very seriously. "Ready for a nice, boring drive through the desert?" Jackson asked as they loaded the supplies into Sarah's truck. "Boring sounds good to me," Sarah replied, securing the cargo area. At exactly 0800, the two vehicles departed Forward Operating Base Falcon and headed toward Firebase Charlie. Sarah followed Jackson's lead vehicle, maintaining proper spacing and staying alert for any signs of trouble along the route. The first part of the drive took them along a paved road that stretched straight across the desert floor. Visibility was excellent, and Sarah could see for miles in every direction. The landscape was empty except for occasional wildlife and the distant mountains that marked the border region. Jackson's voice crackled through the radio. "How's it looking back there, Martinez?" "All good, Corporal. Smooth riding so far." As they drove, Sarah found herself thinking about her role in the military. She had joined the Army partly because she needed the education benefits, but also because she wanted to serve her country. Being a driver wasn't what she had originally envisioned for herself, but she had discovered that she genuinely enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about being responsible for getting people and supplies where they needed to go safely. She took pride in her mechanical skills and her ability to handle vehicles in challenging conditions. Even if the other soldiers didn't always notice or appreciate what she did, Sarah knew that her job was important. The road began to curve slightly as they entered a more hilly area. Sarah could see Firebase Charlie in the distance, another small outpost similar to Forward Operating Base Falcon, but positioned on higher ground with better views of the surrounding territory. 5 minutes out," Jackson reported over the radio. "Copy that," Sarah responded. As they approached Firebase Charlie, Sarah noticed that this base seemed even more isolated than Falcon. The nearest vegetation was miles away, and the rocky terrain looked like it would be impossible to traverse except on established roads. She could understand why soldiers stationed here considered it a hardship assignment. The delivery and pickup at Firebase Charlie went smoothly. The soldiers there were efficient and professional, quickly unloading Sarah's supplies and loading materials that needed to be transported back to Forward Operating Base Falcon. The entire process took less than 30 minutes. "Another successful milk run," Jackson commented as they prepared for the return trip. "These supply runs are usually pretty uneventful." Sarah nodded as she performed a quick vehicle inspection before departing. She had completed dozens of similar missions during her time in the Army, and most of them had been routine. But she never allowed herself to become complacent. In this environment, the mission that seemed most routine was often the one where problems could develop. The return trip started just as smoothly as the drive to Firebase Charlie had gone. Sarah maintained her position behind Jackson's escort vehicle, and both trucks made good time across the desert terrain. The radio chatter was minimal and professional. But as they approached a section of road that curved around a rocky outcropping, Jackson's voice came through the radio with a different tone than before. "Martinez, I'm seeing some movement on the ridgeline to our right. Could be nothing, but stay alert." Sarah immediately increased her attention to the surroundings. She could see the area Jackson was referring to, a series of hills and rock formations that provided plenty of cover for anyone who might want to observe or attack traffic on the road. "I see it," she replied, her hand instinctively moving closer to her weapon. "What's your assessment?" "Not sure yet. Could be animals or local civilians, but something doesn't feel right." As they continued around the curve, Sarah caught a glimpse of sunlight reflecting off something metallic in the rocks above them. The reflection was brief, but it was definitely not natural. "Jackson," she called over the radio, "I just saw light reflecting off something up there. Might be optics or weapons." Jackson's response was immediate and urgent. "All units, this is escort leader. Possible hostile contact. Increase speed and prepare for evasive action." Both vehicles accelerated, but they were still in the curve when the first shots rang out from the hillside above them. The sound of gunfire echoed off the rocky walls around them as Sarah pressed harder on the accelerator. Bullets struck the armored plating of her truck with sharp metallic sounds that made her grip the steering wheel tighter. In front of her, Jackson's escort vehicle swerved slightly as rounds impacted near the driver's side. "Contact right! Multiple shooters in elevated positions!" Jackson's voice came through the radio, tense but controlled. "Martinez, stay close and keep moving." Sarah could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 different positions in the rocks above them. The attackers had chosen their spot well. The road curved around the hillside in a way that would keep any vehicles in their line of fire for several minutes. There was no good cover nearby, and stopping would make them sitting targets. Private Stevens in the escort vehicle's gun position opened fire with the mounted machine gun, sending long bursts toward the enemy positions. The heavy weapon's deep chatter filled the air, and Sarah could see tracer rounds arcing toward the hillside. But the attackers were well concealed behind rocks and boulders, making them difficult targets. "Base, this is escort leader," Jackson called over the radio. "We have hostile contact at grid reference 3847. Multiple shooters with small arms. Request immediate support." The response from forward operating base Falcon came back quickly. "Escort leader, this is base. Understood. QRF is mounting up now. ETA 15 minutes. Can you hold your position?" 15 minutes felt like forever when bullets were flying. Sarah glanced at her side mirrors and saw dust clouds being kicked up by rounds striking the road behind them. The attackers were trying to hit the vehicle's tires or find weak spots in the armor. Jackson's vehicle suddenly slowed, and Sarah heard him curse over the radio. "We've got a problem. Engine's taking hits. Oil pressure is dropping fast." Sarah could see steam starting to rise from under the hood of the escort vehicle. If Jackson's truck broke down here, they would be trapped in the kill zone with limited options for defense. "Can you make it to that rocky area ahead?" Sarah asked over the radio, pointing toward a cluster of large boulders about 200 meters down the road. "Negative. Engine's seizing up. We're going to have to stop." Sarah made a quick decision. "Jackson, I'm coming alongside. We'll transfer your crew to my vehicle." "That's too risky, Martinez. You should keep going and call for backup." "Not leaving you here," Sarah replied firmly, already maneuvering her truck closer to the disabled escort vehicle. The enemy fire intensified as both vehicles slowed. Sarah could hear rounds striking all around them, some coming dangerously close to the windows. She brought her truck parallel to Jackson's vehicle, using her truck's bulk to provide some cover from the shooters on the hillside. Jackson kicked open his door and jumped across to Sarah's truck, followed quickly by Private Stevens. Stevens still carried his rifle and several magazines of ammunition, his face grim but determined. "What's the plan now?" Jackson asked as he climbed into the passenger seat. Sarah was already studying the terrain ahead of them. About 300 meters down the road, she could see a dried creek bed that cut across their path. The road crossed it on a small concrete bridge, but the creek bed itself looked deep enough to provide cover. "We're going to make a run for that creek bed," she said. "Once we get there, we can take defensive positions and wait for the quick reaction force." "That's a long sprint under fire," Stevens observed from behind them. "Better than staying here," Sarah replied, putting the truck in gear. She floored the accelerator and the heavy vehicle surged forward. The engine roared as they picked up speed, racing toward the potential safety of the creek bed. Behind them, she could hear the enemy shooters adjusting their aim, trying to hit the moving target. A bullet spiderwebbed the windshield on Jackson's side, making him duck instinctively. "They're getting our range," he said. Sarah kept the truck moving as fast as the terrain would allow, weaving slightly to make them a harder target. She could see the bridge approaching rapidly, but she wasn't planning to use it. Instead, she aimed for a spot where the creek bank looked less steep. "Hold on," she warned her passengers as she turned sharply off the road. The truck bounced hard as it left the pavement and hit the sandy slope leading down into the creek bed. For a moment, Sarah thought they might tip over, but the vehicle's low center of gravity kept them upright. They slid down the embankment in a cloud of dust and loose rocks, finally coming to a stop in the bottom of the dry creek. The sides of the creek bed were about 8 feet high, providing excellent cover from the shooters on the hillside. For the first time since the ambush began, they were relatively safe from direct fire. "Good thinking, Martinez," Jackson said as they climbed out of the truck. "Now we need to set up defensive positions in case they try to flank us." Stevens was already moving toward the back of the vehicle to establish overwatch. Jackson grabbed the radio to update their situation with base command. Sarah opened her door and stepped out, automatically reaching for her M4 rifle. As she pulled the weapon from its mounting bracket, Jackson looked surprised. "You can handle that thing, right, Martinez? I mean, beyond basic training?" Sarah checked her rifle quickly, ensuring it was loaded and ready. "I'll manage, Corporal." What Jackson didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sarah had grown up on a ranch in Montana. Her father had started teaching her to shoot when she was 8 years old. By the time she was 12, she could consistently hit targets at distances that impressed even experienced hunters. She had joined her high school rifle team and competed in state championships. During her summers, she had worked as a hunting guide, helping city visitors track and shoot deer and elk in the mountains near her family's property. She understood wind patterns, bullet drop, and how to read terrain in ways that most soldiers never learned. But in the Army, she had been assigned to transportation duties based on her mechanical aptitude and driving skills. Her marksmanship abilities had never come up during normal duties, and she hadn't volunteered the information. Being just the driver had become her role, and she had accepted it. Now, crouched in the creek bed with enemy shooters trying to kill them, those old skills felt as natural as breathing. "Movement on the ridge," Stevens called out, pointing toward the area where the attackers had been firing from. "Looks like 2 or 3 of them are trying to get to a flanking position." Sarah followed his gaze and immediately spotted what he was seeing. 3 figures in desert camouflage were moving among the rocks, trying to work their way around to a position where they could fire down into the creek bed. They were about 400 meters away and moving carefully from cover to cover. Jackson raised his rifle and fired several shots in their direction, but the range was challenging for accurate shooting with standard military optics. His rounds struck near the targets but didn't appear to hit anything. "They're too far out," Stevens said. "By the time they get close enough for effective fire, they'll have good positions on us." Sarah had been watching the enemy movement through her rifle scope, calculating distance and wind conditions automatically. The shooting angle was complex because of the elevated positions and the way the morning sun created heat shimmer off the rocky surfaces. But she could see the pattern of their movement. The attackers were following a ridge line that would eventually bring them to an outcropping directly above the creek bed. From there, they would have clear shots at anyone taking cover below. "I can take them," Sarah said quietly. Jackson looked at her skeptically. "Martinez, that's a long shot with a standard rifle. These aren't paper targets at the range." Sarah was already adjusting her position, using a large rock to steady her rifle. She had noticed something that the others hadn't seen. One of the attackers was carrying what looked like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. If he reached the position he was moving toward, he would be able to fire directly into their defensive position. "Trust me," she said, settling into a shooting stance that felt as comfortable as putting on a familiar pair of boots. The first target was moving between two large rocks, trying to stay low while advancing. Sarah tracked his movement, leading him slightly to account for his speed and the bullet's travel time. The distance was about 380 meters according to her mental calculations. She controlled her breathing, letting half the air out of her lungs and holding steady. The rifle seemed to disappear from her awareness as she focused entirely on the target. Her finger found the trigger, applying smooth, steady pressure. The shot broke with a crack that echoed off the creek walls. Through her scope, Sarah saw the target stumble and fall behind the rocks he had been using for cover. He didn't get back up. Jackson and Stevens stared at her in amazement. "Holy shit, Martinez," Stevens whispered. "Did you just make a shot at nearly 400 meters?" Sarah was already tracking the second target, who had frozen when his partner went down. He was trying to figure out where the shot had come from, but his position left him partially exposed. The second shot came 15 seconds later. This target also dropped and stayed down. The third attacker, the one with the RPG launcher, had taken cover behind a large boulder and was no longer visible. But Sarah had noticed his previous movement pattern and could predict where he would emerge if he continued toward his original objective. She kept her rifle trained on a gap between rocks where she expected him to appear. The minutes stretched out in tense silence, broken only by distant radio chatter and the sound of vehicles approaching from the direction of Forward Operating Base Falcon. Jackson was speaking rapidly into his radio, updating Base Command on their situation. "Base, this is Escort Leader. Unknown hostile casualties confirmed. Martinez has neutralized at least 2 enemy shooters. We're holding position in the creek bed." "Escort Leader, this is QRF Leader. We have you visual. 3 vehicles approaching from your 6 o'clock. Estimate 2 minutes to your position." Sarah maintained her focus on the rocks where she expected the third attacker to appear. Her patience was rewarded when she caught a glimpse of movement near the boulder where he had taken cover. He was trying to reposition for a shot with the rocket launcher. This shot would be the most challenging yet. The target was further away, approximately 450 meters, and the angle was more difficult because of the terrain. Sarah adjusted her aim point, accounting for the increased distance and the slight crosswind she had noticed. The third shot was the most important one. If the attacker managed to use the RPG effectively, he could seriously damage or destroy the approaching rescue vehicles or kill everyone in the creek bed with indirect fire. Sarah's rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she immediately saw through her scope that the shot had found its mark. The figure with the RPG launcher collapsed behind the boulder, and the weapon clattered down the rocky slope, clearly abandoned. The silence that followed was profound. Jackson and Stevens were staring at Sarah with expressions of complete disbelief. "Martinez," Jackson said slowly. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" Before Sarah could answer, the lead vehicle of the Quick Reaction Force appeared on the road above them. Within minutes, soldiers were rappelling down into the creek bed to establish security, while others moved up the hillside to clear the enemy positions. Captain Morrison's voice came over Jackson's radio. "Escort Leader, this is Base Commander. What's your status?" Jackson looked at Sarah, then keyed the radio. "Base Commander. This is Escort Leader. All friendly personnel accounted for. No casualties. Enemy contact has been neutralized by..." He paused, glancing at Sarah again. "By our driver, Private Martinez." There was a long silence before Captain Morrison responded. "Say again, Escort Leader, did you say the driver neutralized the enemy contact?" "Affirmative, sir. 3 confirmed enemy KIA at distances between 350 and 450 meters. All shots fired by Private Martinez." Another pause. "Understood. Bring her in for debrief immediately upon return to base." The QRF team leader, Lieutenant Parker, approached their position with a grim expression. "My people are clearing the hillside now. he reported. "We found 3 bodies so far, all consistent with single gunshot wounds at long range. Precision shooting." He looked directly at Sarah. "Private, I've been in the Army for 8 years and I've seen some good shooting. What you did today was exceptional. Where did you train?" Sarah slung her rifle and gathered her gear. "Montana, sir. My father's ranch." Lieutenant Parker nodded slowly. "Well, your father taught you well. You probably saved a lot of lives today." As the QRF team finished securing the area and recovering the abandoned vehicles, word of Sarah's shooting spread quickly through the unit. Soldiers who had barely acknowledged her existence before were now looking at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. The drive back to Forward Operating Base Falcon was much different from the morning supply run. Sarah found herself in the passenger seat of one of the QRF vehicles, while Sergeant Williams, an experienced infantryman, drove her truck back to base. "So, Martinez," Jackson said as they approached the base, "I guess there's more to you than being just a driver." Sarah watched the familiar walls of Forward Operating Base Falcon come into view. She realized that after today, her role in the Army was probably going to change significantly. The question was whether she was ready for whatever came next. As they passed through the main gate, Sarah could see soldiers gathering near the command center. Word had already reached the base about what had happened during the supply run. She was about to discover that exceptional performance in combat had a way of changing everything, whether you wanted it to or not. The debrief room in the command center felt smaller than usual, with Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Parker, and Sergeant Major Thompson all present. Sarah sat across from them at a metal table, still wearing her dusty uniform from the morning's mission. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that made everyone look more serious than normal. Captain Morrison opened a folder and spread several papers across the table. "Private Martinez, let's start from the beginning. Walk me through exactly what happened during the contact." For the next hour, Sarah described every detail of the ambush and the firefight that followed. She explained her decisions to rescue Jackson's crew, her choice to take cover in the creek bed, and finally, her engagement of the enemy shooters. "The first target was moving in a predictable pattern," she said, tracing the movement on a map Lieutenant Parker had provided. "I could tell he was trying to reach this position here, which would have given him a clear field of fire down into our defensive position." "And the distance to target?" Sergeant Major Thompson asked, making notes in a small notebook. "Approximately 380 meters for the first shot, 390 for the second, and 450 for the third target with the RPG launcher." Lieutenant Parker whistled softly. "Private, those are sniper-quality shots. Where exactly did you receive advanced marksmanship training?" Sarah had been dreading this question, but she answered honestly. "I didn't receive formal military training beyond basic rifle instruction, sir. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Montana. My father taught me to hunt, and I competed on my high school rifle team." Captain Morrison leaned forward. "You're telling me that what happened today was based on civilian hunting experience?" "Yes, sir. I've been shooting since I was 8 years old. Long-range hunting was normal on our ranch because of the terrain and the game we pursued." The 3 senior soldiers exchanged glances. Sergeant Major Thompson closed his notebook and looked directly at Sarah. "Private Martinez, your personnel file makes no mention of advanced marksmanship skills. Why wasn't this documented during your initial processing?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Sir, when I enlisted, the recruiters focused on my mechanical aptitude and driving experience. My MOS was assigned based on the Army's transportation needs. No one asked about hunting or competitive shooting." "And you didn't volunteer this information?" Captain Morrison asked. "No, sir. I was told the Army would train me for whatever job they needed me to do. I assume my previous experience wasn't relevant to military operations." Lieutenant Parker shook his head in disbelief. "Private, what you did today potentially saved multiple lives. 3 enemy combatants in elevated positions with RPG capability could have caused significant casualties to our QRF team. Your shooting skills are absolutely relevant to military operations. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. A communications specialist entered and handed Captain Morrison a message form. Morrison read it quickly, his expression becoming more serious. "Private Martinez," he said, "I've just received orders regarding your situation. Higher command has been briefed on today's events. You're being temporarily reassigned to assist our base defense team while they conduct a formal evaluation of your capabilities." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "What kind of evaluation, sir?" "Marksmanship testing, tactical assessment, and psychological evaluation to determine if you're suitable for specialized training," Sergeant Major Thompson explained. "The Army has significant investment in advanced marksman positions. If you have natural talent that's been overlooked, they want to develop it properly." Captain Morrison stood up, signaling the end of the formal debrief. "You'll start tomorrow morning with Master Sergeant Rodriguez in our sniper section. He'll conduct preliminary testing to establish baseline measurements of your abilities." As Sarah prepared to leave, Lieutenant Parker added, "Private, one more thing. What happened today is already spreading through the base. Some of the soldiers are calling it the day the driver became a sniper. You should understand that your reputation has changed permanently." Walking back across the base compound, Sarah could feel the truth of Lieutenant Parker's words. Soldiers who had never spoken to her before nodded respectfully as she passed. A group of mechanics at the motor pool actually stopped their conversation to watch her walk by. Corporal Jackson intercepted her near the dining facility. "Martinez, I wanted to thank you properly for what you did today. Stevens and I both know we'd be dead right now if you hadn't been there." "Just doing my job, Corporal," Sarah replied. Jackson laughed. "Your job was to drive a supply truck. What you did today was way beyond that. Look, some of us are getting together tonight to talk about what happened. You should join us." That evening, Sarah found herself sitting around a table in the dining facility with Jackson, Stevens, and several other soldiers who had heard about the morning's events. The conversation started with questions about her shooting background, but gradually evolved into something more significant. "The thing is," said Specialist Williams, a communications expert, "we all have skills and experience that the Army doesn't know about. I worked in computer security before I enlisted, but they have me running radio communications instead of cyber defense." Private Chen, a supply clerk, nodded in agreement. "I was a paramedic before joining up. I could probably save lives in combat situations, but my job is counting inventory in a warehouse." Sarah realized that her situation wasn't unique. The military's personnel system was efficient at matching people to immediate needs, but it wasn't perfect at recognizing and utilizing all the talents that soldiers brought with them. "So what happens now?" Stevens asked. "Do you get reassigned to a sniper unit?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Tomorrow I start testing with Master Sergeant Rodriguez. I guess we'll see what happens after that." The next morning, Sarah reported to the base defense team's area at C-600. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting for her with several other NCOs she didn't recognize. Rodriguez was a compact, serious-looking man with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent years in combat zones. "Private Martinez," he said without preamble, "I've read the reports from yesterday's contact. Today we're going to find out if those shots were luck or skill. Are you ready?" "Yes, Sergeant." The testing began at the base's firing range, but it quickly became clear that the standard range wasn't adequate for what Rodriguez had in mind. After Sarah consistently hit targets at 300 meters with iron sights, they moved to a more remote area of the base where longer shots were possible. "Let's see what you can do at 500 meters, Rodriguez said, setting up targets at various distances. "Use this rifle." He handed her a precision rifle with a high-quality scope that was much more advanced than the standard infantry weapon she had used during the ambush. The rifle felt perfectly balanced in her hands, and the scope was clearer and more precise than anything she had used before. The first shot at 500 meters hit dead center. The second shot, at 600 meters, was slightly off-center but still well within what would be considered a lethal hit. Rodriguez made notes on a clipboard, his expression remaining neutral. "Wind compensation," he said, pointing to flags that showed shifting wind patterns. "Factor in the crosswind and try again at 700 meters." Sarah studied the environmental conditions, adjusting her point of aim to account for the wind speed and direction. The shot struck the target near the center ring. Rodriguez's expression finally showed some approval. "That was a first-round hit at 700 meters with wind compensation," he said to the other NCOs who were observing. "How much formal training did you say you had?" "None, Sergeant. Just hunting and high school competition." Rodriguez looked at the other NCOs, who were shaking their heads in amazement. "Private Martinez, in 20 years of training snipers, I've never seen someone with no formal military training shoot like this. Your natural ability is exceptional." The testing continued for 3 days. Sarah shot at various distances, under different weather conditions, and from different positions. She demonstrated her ability to estimate ranges without electronic aids, calculate wind effects, and maintain accuracy under simulated stress conditions. On the 3rd day, Captain Morrison arrived at the range with several visitors, officers Sarah didn't recognize, wearing insignia from higher command levels. "Private Martinez," Captain Morrison said, "these officers are from the Special Operations Training Command. They've been reviewing your test results." Colonel Hayes, a tall woman with silver hair and intense eyes, stepped forward. "Private, your performance over the past 3 days has been remarkable. We have a proposition for you." Sarah came to attention. "Yes, ma'am. The Army has several programs for soldiers with exceptional marksmanship abilities. Based on your demonstrated skills and Master Sergeant Rodriguez's assessment, you're qualified for advanced sniper training at Fort Benning. The question is whether you're interested." Sarah felt her heart racing. This was an opportunity she had never imagined when she enlisted as a transportation specialist. "Ma'am, what would that involve?" 6 months of intensive training in marksmanship, fieldcraft, tactics, and mission planning," Colonel Hayes explained. "If you successfully complete the program, you would be assigned to a sniper section in an active combat unit. It's challenging, dangerous work, but soldiers with your natural abilities are rare." Master Sergeant Rodriguez added, "Private, I've trained hundreds of soldiers. Most of them struggle to achieve what you accomplished in 3 days. With proper training, you could become one of the Army's elite marksmen." Sarah thought about her journey from the isolated ranch in Montana to this moment at a forward operating base where her hidden skills had finally been recognized. She thought about the convoy ambush and how her abilities had saved lives when they were needed most. "Ma'am," she said to Colonel Hayes, "I'd be honored to attend the training." Colonel Hayes smiled. "Outstanding. Your orders are being processed now. You'll leave for Fort Benning next week." As the officers departed, Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached Sarah privately. "Martinez, I want you to understand something. Yesterday, you were just another driver. Today, you're on your way to becoming one of the Army's most specialized soldiers. That's a big change." "I understand, Sergeant. Do you? Because once you complete sniper training, you'll never go back to being invisible. Elite units will want you. Dangerous missions will find you. Your life is going to be very different." Sarah looked around at Forward Operating Base Falcon, thinking about how much had changed in just a few days. "Sergeant, I think I'm ready for different." That evening, Sarah packed her belongings and prepared for another transition. Corporal Jackson stopped by her quarters to say goodbye. "So, I guess this is it," he said. "From driver to sniper in less than a week. That might be some kind of record." Sarah smiled. "Jackson, can I ask you something? Did you really think I was just a driver?" Jackson considered the question seriously. "Honestly? Yeah, I did. I never looked beyond your job description to see what else you might be capable of. I think a lot of us make that mistake." "And now?" Now I'm wondering how many other soldiers we work with every day have abilities we don't know about. Maybe we should pay more attention. The next morning, as Sarah waited for transportation to the airfield, Captain Morrison found her in the dining facility. "Private Martinez," he said, sitting down across from her, "I wanted to talk to you before you leave." "Yes, sir." "What happened here last week is going to change how we think about personnel assignments. Your situation has made everyone realize that we might be wasting talent by making assumptions about what soldiers can do based on their initial job classifications." Captain Morrison paused, then continued. "I've been ordered to implement new procedures for identifying soldiers with specialized skills that aren't reflected in their personnel files. We're calling it the Martinez Protocol." Sarah was surprised. "Sir, I don't think that's necessary. Private, you saved lives because you had skills no one knew you possessed. If there are other soldiers in similar situations, we need to find them before we're in another life-or-death situation." A vehicle horn honked outside, signaling that Sarah's transportation had arrived. She stood up and gathered her gear. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Granted. The Army gave me a chance to serve, even though I started out as just a driver. Maybe that's the most important thing, not assuming anyone is just anything." Captain Morrison stood and extended his hand. "Good luck at Fort Benning, soon to be former Private Martinez. Make us proud." As Sarah climbed into the vehicle that would take her to the airfield and the next phase of her military career, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. A week ago, she had been content to be overlooked, to do her job quietly and competently without recognition. Now she was heading to specialized training that would transform her into one of the Army's most elite soldiers. The woman who had been only the driver was about to become something much more significant. But as the vehicle pulled away from Forward Operating Base Falcon, Sarah realized that her fundamental character hadn't changed. She was still the same person who took pride in doing her job well, who looked out for her fellow soldiers, and who stepped up when the situation demanded it. The difference was that now everyone else knew it too. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had been right. Her life was going to be very different. But as Sarah watched the desert landscape pass by through the vehicle's window, she felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had spent too many years hiding her capabilities behind the safety of being underestimated. It was time to see what she could really accomplish when her skills were recognized, developed, and properly utilized. The Army was about to discover that sometimes the most valuable soldiers are the ones you least expect. The convoy ambush that had started as a routine supply run had ended up changing everything. Sarah Martinez was no longer just the driver. She was about to become exactly what the Army needed her to be: a highly trained, exceptionally skilled soldier whose abilities could make the difference between success and failure in the most challenging missions. As the vehicle reached the main road leading away from the forward operating base, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She had finally found her place in the military, and it was exactly where she belonged.